A single splash of wine can ruin a uniform, but a single sentence can destroy an empire. Isabella Rossi was just a waitress, invisible to the men deciding the fate of billions. But when the most arrogant man in New York, billionaire Griffin Vance, decided to make her the target of his rage, he made a fatal miscalculation. He thought he was pouring wine on a nobody. He didn't know he was speaking to a scholar. He didn't know who was listening, and he certainly didn't expect that her reply, in a language he couldn't understand, would bring the most powerful room in the city to its feet in applause. The air inside Astra was different from the air on the street. 64 floors below, New York City was a chaotic symphony of sirens, steam, and shouting. Down there, Isabella Rossi was just another face in the crowd, a 24-year-old Columbia postgrad student drowning in student debt and clutching a sheaf of medical bills for her mother's failing lungs. Down there, she was a daughter, a scholar of near-extinct Semitic dialects, a woman who could dream in 5 languages but could barely afford her rent. But up here, inside the hushed champagne gold sanctuary of Astra, she was just server, a ghost in a crisp white blouse and a starched black apron. Astra was not merely a restaurant, it was a fortress of wealth. Its floor-to-ceiling windows were not just glass. They were crystalline barriers separating the titans of industry from the mortals below. The clientele didn't just eat, they brokered deals, they destroyed competitors, and they celebrated hostile takeovers. The clinking of their silverware was the sound of money changing hands. Tonight, the restaurant was buzzing with a particularly electric tension. Every table was occupied. You could practically smell the ambition, a sharp metallic tang beneath the richer aromas of truffle oil and seared scallops. Isabella, known as Bella to her friends, felt the familiar ache starting in her lower back. She balanced a heavy silver tray, laden with 3 flutes of Dom Perignon and a complex 8-ingredient cocktail called the Gilded Cage. Her focus was absolute. In this world, a single mistake, a slip, a spill, a misremembered name, was not just an error. It was a financial liability, an offense against the fragile egos of men who measured their worth in stock points. "Table 9, Rossi," and smile, hissed Miles Davies, the restaurant's general manager. Davies was a thin, perpetually stressed man who looked as though he'd been assembled from spare parts of a greyhound. "They're celebrating. Look alive. We need that table turned in 45. "Yes, Mr. Davies," Bella murmured, her voice carefully neutral. Smiling was the hardest part. Her face felt like a mask, and the muscles in her cheeks protested. She moved through the narrow channels between tables, a ballet of practiced efficiency. She was good at this. She was intelligent, observant, and, most importantly, invisible. She noted the way the woman at table 7 discreetly passed a business card to the man at table 8, even as her husband discussed derivatives. She heard the snippets of conversation, art auctions at Sotheby's, a new wing at the Met, the impending collapse of a rival firm. She deposited the champagne at table 9, her smile fixed. "Your Dom Perignon and the Gilded Cage. May I assist you with anything else this evening?" They didn't even look at her. They just raised their glasses, their laughter loud and brittle. Bella retreated, her shoulders tight. Every fiber of her being screamed that she did not belong here. Her mind, which just this morning had been deep in the complexities of Aramaic syntax, felt dulled, flattened by the sheer, oppressive weight of the opulence around her. Her thesis, lingual echoes, the pervasiveness of Gulf dialects in modern diplomatic discourse, felt like a relic from another life. She passed the central banquet, the most coveted spot in the restaurant, known as the Summit. It was currently occupied by a large party. A cold, commanding energy emanated from the head of the table. That was him, Griffin Vance. Bella knew the name. Everyone in New York knew the name. Griffin Vance was not old money, he was new money, violent money. He had clawed his way to the top of the tech world with a ruthlessness that was legendary. Vance Tech, his brainchild, specialized in predictive AI and data mining, a polite way of saying digital surveillance. He was in his late 30s with sharp features, cold blue eyes, and hair slicked back with a precision that seemed almost aggressive. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than her mother's last 3 surgeries. He looked, Bella thought, profoundly bored. He was hosting two other men. One was a distinguished older British gentleman with a crisp silver mustache and an air of quiet authority. This was Sir Julian Croft, the London-based head of the powerful sovereign wealth fund, the Al-Qadima Group. The other man was quieter, with dark, observant eyes and a dignified bearing. He wore a simple, elegant dark suit, but his watch, Bella noted, was a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime, a seven-figure timepiece. This was Mr. Khaled al-Badr, the fund's chief investment strategist, a man known to be the true power behind the throne. The deal, as the restaurant gossip mill had churned out, was massive. Griffin Vance was trying to secure a multi-billion-dollar investment for his Desert Star project, a sprawling new data hub he wanted to build in the Gulf. Bella watched as Vance spoke, his gestures wide and arrogant. He laughed loudly, but neither Sir Julian nor Mr. al-Badr joined in. Vance's own translator, a nervous-looking man sitting slightly behind him, would periodically lean in and murmur something to Mr. al-Badr, who would just nod slowly, his expression unreadable. "Look at that shark," whispered Sarah, another waitress, as she passed Bella at the service station, loading up on bread baskets. "Vance has been snapping at his translator for 10 minutes. And the other guy, the quiet one, he's barely said 2 words. Vance is bombing and he knows it." Bella just nodded, restocking her polishing cloths. She felt a small, cold knot of pity, not for Vance, but for the translator. To be caught between a man like Griffin Vance and a man like Khaled al-Badr was a special kind of professional hell. Mr. Davies materialized at her elbow again, his voice a low hiss. "Rossi, table 4 needs their check. Table 11 is complaining about the music. And the Summit, Vance's table, just ordered the 1982 Cheval Blanc. Mr. al-Badr requested it personally." Bella's eyes widened slightly. The 82 Cheval Blanc. That was a $20,000 bottle of wine. "Sebastian, our chief sommelier, is presenting it," Davies continued, wiping an invisible speck of dust from his lapel. "But you will be responsible for the main course service. Do not, under any circumstances, make a mistake. The fate of this restaurant's reputation tonight rests on that table." "I understand, Mr. Davies," Bella said, the words tasting like ash. The fate of the restaurant. Her fate was just to get through the next 4 hours, collect her meager tips, and catch the 2 a.m. subway back to her tiny book-filled apartment. She took a deep breath, straightened her apron, and prepared to enter the lion's den. The tray felt heavier than ever. Griffin Vance detested this. He hated the performance, the obsequious bowing and scraping required to secure capital, especially from men he considered his intellectual inferiors. He was Griffin Vance. He didn't ask. He dictated. His Vance Tech algorithms were already running half the world's logistics and security grids. He shouldn't have to be here, sipping overpriced grape juice and pretending to be civilized. But the Desert Star project was his baby. It was his legacy. It would be the largest private data repository on Earth, a fortress of information that would make him not just a billionaire, not just a king, but a god. And for that, he needed the Al-Qadima Group's limitless cash. The dinner was not going well. His own translator, a man named Peterson, was proving to be utterly useless. Griffin had hired him from a top-tier firm, but the man was visibly sweating. Every time Griffin made a powerful declarative statement, Desert Star isn't just a hub, it's the future of predictive sovereignty. Peterson would translate it into a string of weak, meandering Arabic. Griffin didn't speak the language, but he could read a room, and Mr. al-Badr looked utterly unimpressed. Sir Julian Croft, the British bulldog, was just as bad, acting as a cultural gatekeeper. "Griffin," Sir Julian had said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, "I believe Mr. al-Badr is less interested in sovereignty and more interested in thermal dynamics and data latency. Perhaps we could avoid the philosophical hyperbole?" Hyperbole? Griffin was painting a masterpiece, and these men were asking about the price of the canvas. "Look, Julian," Griffin said, leaning forward and lowering his voice, a predator's growl, "my tech is revolutionary. It's disruptive. You don't get to be a disruptor by talking about thermal dynamics. You get there by breaking things. We are going to break the entire concept of data insecurity. Mr. Albadr said something quietly to Sir Julian. Sir Julian nodded. Mr. Albadr observes, Sir Julian translated, that it is often the disruptors who find themselves broken when they fail to respect the fundamentals. He asks if your security protocols are as robust as your marketing. Griffin felt a hot flash of anger. This was an insult. He was about to retort when the sommelier, a man with an offensively large mustache, arrived with the wine. The 1982 Cheval Blanc, the sommelier announced with a reverence that Griffin found pathetic. An exceptional choice, sir. Mr. Albadr, who had been silent for nearly 15 minutes, finally spoke directly to the sommelier. He asked a question, not in English, but in the same quiet, authoritative tone. The sommelier looked confused. Peterson, the translator, stammered, Sir, he is asking about the storage, the provenance. Before Peterson could mangle another sentence, Mr. Albadr waved a dismissive hand and switched to flawless, Oxford-accented English. My apologies. I was asking if this bottle came from the specific Sotheby's auction in 2016, or if it was a private acquisition. The Sotheby's lot had some concerns regarding ullage. The entire table paused. Griffin felt his jaw tighten. The man spoke perfect English. He had been letting Griffin perform for his translator this whole time. He had been testing him. It was a power play. Griffin had been played for a fool. Sir Julian Croft hid a small smile behind his napkin. It is indeed from a private acquisition, sir. The sommelier recovered, visibly relieved. From the cellar of Mr. James Henderson. Ah, Henderson. Excellent, Mr. Albadr said, and then, as if a switch had been flipped, reverted to his silent, observant persona, nodding for the sommelier to pour. Griffin was seething. The dinner was a failure. He was losing them. The Desert Star project was slipping through his fingers because this investor was playing games with him. He felt the familiar, cold rage building in his chest. He needed control. He needed to reassert his dominance. He watched as the wine was poured, a deep, velvety ruby that cost more than the translator's annual salary. He took a sip. It tasted like ash. His eyes scanned the room, looking for a target, any target. A waiter, a busboy, anyone he could use to demonstrate that this was his world, his rules. And then he saw her, the waitress, Isabella Rossi. She was approaching their table carrying a heavy tray of their main courses, a filet mignon for him, a Dover sole for Sir Julian, and a complex lamb dish for Mr. Albadr. She was just a cog in the machine, a nobody. Perfect. She moved with a tense grace, her face pale, her eyes focused on the tray. She was insignificant. She was a tool, and in that moment, Griffin Vance decided she would be the instrument of his frustration. He just needed a reason. Bella's hands were steady, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. This was it, the most important table in the restaurant. She approached the summit with the practiced, gliding steps Mr. Davies had drilled into them for months. Right side, right hand for water. Left side, left hand for food. Serve Mr. Albadr first, then Sir Julian, then Mr. Vance. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not interrupt. Do not exist. The rules echoed in her head. She was a ghost. She reached the table. The conversation had stalled. The air was thick with a silence that felt heavier and more expensive than the velvet ropes at the entrance. Griffin Vance was staring into his wine glass, his jaw set. Mr. Albadr was inspecting his fork. Sir Julian was gazing out the window at the glittering expanse of Manhattan. Excuse me, Mr. Albadr, Bella murmured, her voice barely a whisper. She carefully placed the intricate lamb dish in front of him. He nodded, a brief, impersonal acknowledgement. One down. She moved to her left, behind Sir Julian. Sir Julian, your Dover sole. She placed the plate. He smiled briefly. Thank you, my dear. Two down. Now, for Griffin Vance. She circled the table, holding the last heavy plate, the 12-ounce filet, medium rare. She held the silver tray, now empty save for a few small garnish bowls, in her left hand, balanced against her hip. She approached him from the left. The space was tight. Behind her, at an adjacent table, A group of loud, celebratory stockbrokers were growing more raucous. One of them, a man named Brad with a booming laugh and a loosened tie, was telling an animated story. And I said to him, sell it all, Brad roared, gesturing wildly with his arms. Bella saw it happen in slow motion. Brad's elbow shot backward, slamming directly into the edge of her silver tray. The tray bucked in her hand. The small garnished bowls, containing peppercorn sauce and a sprig of thyme, flew. But worse, the impact knocked Bella's entire body forward, a violent, unavoidable lurch. She stumbled. To her credit, she did not drop the fillet. Her right hand, holding the plate, remained miraculously steady. But her left arm, the one that had held the tray, swung out to catch her balance. Her left hand, still clutching the now empty silver tray, collided with Griffin Vance's arm. His arm, which was at that very moment lifting the $20,000 bottle of 1982 Cheval Blanc to refill his glass. The collision was not a tidal wave. It was a splash, a small, discreet, but utterly catastrophic cascade of deep red wine. It arced perfectly from the neck of the bottle, splashing onto the pristine white cuff of Griffin Vance's custom-made shirt. A few dark crimson drops splattered onto the lapel of his suit jacket. The room, which had been a dull roar, seemed to inhale. The silence was absolute. Brad, the stockbroker, froze, his hand still in the air. Sir Julian and Mr. Albater looked up, startled. Bella stood paralyzed, her hand still in the air. "Oh," she breathed, the sound stolen from her lungs. "Mr. Vance, I am so... Griffin Vance did not move. He very, very slowly lowered the bottle of wine, placing it on the table with a soft, deliberate click. He looked down at his sleeve. He saw the dark stains spreading through the fine Egyptian cotton. He saw the droplets on his $10,000 suit. He did not look at Brad, the man who had actually caused the accident. He didn't even register his existence. He lifted his cold blue eyes and they locked directly onto Isabella Rossi. He had found his target. "You," he said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. Mr. Davies was already in motion, his face the color of spoiled milk. "Mr. Vance, sir, 1,000 apologies. This is inexcusable. An accident, I assure you." Griffin raised one hand and Mr. Davies instantly fell silent. "You," Griffin repeated, his voice silky smooth yet filled with venom. "You clumsy, incompetent little..." He paused, searching for the word. Bella was trembling, the empty tray shaking in her hand. "Sir, I was bumped. I am so terribly sorry. Let me get a cloth. Let me..." She reached for a napkin, but Griffin was faster. He picked up his own glass, the one that was still half full of the priceless wine. "You want to get a cloth?" Griffin asked, his voice still a whisper, but it carried across the silent room. "You want to clean it up?" He stood up. Bella flinched, taking a half step back. He looked at her, then at the glass in his hand, then back at her. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. It was not a smile of amusement. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated power. "No," Griffin Vance said clearly. "I think you missed a spot." And with a deliberate, steady hand, he inverted the glass and poured the remaining contents of the 1982 Cheval Blanc directly onto the top of Isabella Rossi's head. The wine was cold. It hit her scalp with a frigid shock, then cascaded down, sluicing through her dark hair, over her forehead and down her cheeks. It felt thick, like syrup. For a second, Bella couldn't breathe. The world narrowed to the smell, an overwhelming pungent odor of dark fruit, oak, and alcohol. It dripped from her eyelashes, staining her vision red. It ran down her neck, seeping under the collar of her white blouse. The humiliation was instantaneous and absolute. It was a physical weight, pressing her down, stealing the air from her lungs. The silence in Astra was no longer just a pause. It was a suffocating vacuum. Every diner in the 64-floor establishment was frozen. The stockbrokers at the next table were statues. The chefs in the open kitchen had stopped moving. The only sound was the slow, steady drip, drip, drip of $20,000 wine falling from Bella's hair onto the pristine white tablecloth at Griffin Vance's feet. Griffin held the empty glass for a moment longer, savoring the tableau. He had done it. He had taken back control. The focus of the room was no longer on his failed business pitch or his public embarrassment at the hands of Mr. Albader. It was on him and on the girl he had just broken. He was the one holding the glass. He was the one in charge. He placed the empty glass on the table with a firm thud. "There," he said, his voice resonating with satisfaction. "I think that covers it." Bella just stood there shaking. Tears welled in her eyes, mixing with the wine, and she fought them back with every ounce of her will. She would not cry. She would not give him the satisfaction. She could feel the stares of 100 people on her, 100 needles of pity and disgust. Mr. Davies, the manager, finally snapped out of his paralysis, but he did not rush to Bella's side. He rushed to Griffin's. "Mr. Vance, sir," he stammered, flapping a napkin uselessly in Griffin's direction. "Please accept this is... Rossi, you are finished. Get out. Get out of my restaurant." He turned on Bella, his face purple with a mixture of rage and terror. Firing her was his only move, a sacrifice to appease the angry god. "Go!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. Griffin Vance merely watched, a small, contemptuous smirk on his lips. He'd won. He sat back down, pulling his stained cuff away from his wrist with a look of distaste. "Send me the cleaning bill," he said to Davies, "and get this mess out of my sight, and bring me a new bottle and a new glass." Sir Julian Croft looked appalled. He had placed his napkin on the table and was staring at Griffin as if he were a piece of filth he'd found on his shoe. "Vance," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, "that was unconscionable." "It was justice, Julian," Griffin snapped, all pretense of civility gone. "You don't build an empire by tolerating incompetence. She ruined a $20,000 bottle of wine and a $5,000 suit. She's lucky I didn't sue her." Mr. Albader had not moved. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes, dark and penetrating, were fixed on Bella. He looked disappointed, not angry, not shocked. He looked profoundly and deeply disappointed. Mr. Davies grabbed Bella's arm, his fingers digging into her bicep. "Did you hear me? I said get out." Bella winced, the pain and the humiliation threatening to finally overwhelm her. She felt small, stupid, and utterly powerless. This was her life. This was the reality that all her linguistic brilliance, all her hard work, all her sacrifice had led to. Being humiliated by a monster while men like Davies enabled him. Griffin Vance turned back to the table, dismissing her entirely. "Now," he said to Mr. Albader, "about the latency protocols. Let's have my translator explain." He gestured to Peterson, the translator, but Peterson was staring at Bella, his face pale with horror. Griffin snapped his fingers. "Peterson, do your job. Tell him." This was the moment. Bella could feel the manager's hand pulling her away. She could feel the tears finally breaking free, hot and stinging. She was about to be dragged from the room like a piece of trash. Her entire future was collapsing. She'd be fired, blacklisted. How would she pay for her mother's treatment? How would she finish her degree? It was all over, all because a man was bumped and another man was cruel. She looked past the weeping manager, past the sneering face of Griffin Vance. Her eyes met the dark, steady gaze of Mr. Khalid Albader, and something inside her shifted. The fear didn't vanish, but it was suddenly joined by a different kind of fire, a cold, clear, academic fury. She had spent 5 years of her life studying. She had sacrificed everything to understand the world these men inhabited. She understood the language, not just the words, but the culture. She understood honor. She understood respect. And she understood, with perfect, sudden clarity, that Griffin Vance had just committed a cultural sin far greater than spilling wine. In front of a respected guest from the Gulf, he had demonstrated a complete and total lack of karam, of generosity, of honor, of hospitality. He had behaved not like a lion, but like a jackal. She knew Mr. Albader's dialect. She had been listening to him and Sir Julian earlier. It was a formal, educated Gulf dialect, the exact dialect her thesis was focused on. She stopped trembling. She planted her feet. She pulled her arm gently but firmly from Mr. Davies's grasp. "Mr. Davies," she said, her voice shaking but clear, "let go of me. Davies was so surprised he did. Bella stood up straight, wine dripping from her chin. She ignored Griffin Vance. She ignored everyone. She looked directly, respectfully, and unflinchingly at Mr. Khaled al-Badr. And then she spoke. She did not speak in English. The words that came from her lips were not the familiar, clipped tones of the New York restaurant. They were a cascade of liquid, rolling consonants and deep poetic vowels. The language was rich, formal, and ancient. It filled the silence of the room, a stark and beautiful contrast to the ugliness of the preceding moments. Griffin Vance froze, his hand halfway to his new glass. "What?" he barked. "What is that gibberish? Is she insane?" Mr. Davies looked like he was about to have a heart attack. "Rossi, what? Security." But no one moved. Mr. Khaled al-Badr's head, which had been bowed, snapped up. His eyes widened, not just in surprise, but in stunned comprehension. Sir Julian Croft, who had spent 20 years as a diplomat in the Middle East, put his hand to his mouth, his eyes wide with astonishment. Bella's voice did not waver. She spoke with a fluency that was not just learned, but felt. She did not stumble. She did not hesitate. She used the formal "you," the language of deep, profound respect reserved for scholars and royalty. Though the room was filled with English speakers, her meaning was translated, moment by moment, for the reader of the scene. The thoughts, the words, the power. She said in this flawless, classical language, "Esteemed sir, I must offer you and your honorable companion my deepest and most sincere apologies for this disruption to your evening." Peterson, the translator, went white. He understood enough to know that her command of the language was not just better than his, it was in another universe entirely. Bella continued, her gaze never leaving Mr. al-Badr. "It is a profound dishonor that you, as a guest in our city, should be forced to witness such a display of discourtesy, an act that brings shame to the very concept of hospitality." She did not apologize for herself. She did not apologize for the spill. She apologized on behalf of the city for Griffin Vance's behavior. She had, in one sentence, reframed the entire event. He was the shame. He was the disruption. Griffin, sensing the shift in power but not understanding its source, grew frantic. "What did she say, Peterson? Damn it, man, translate. What is she saying?" Peterson stammered. "Sir, she is apologizing to him." "To him," Griffin laughed, a harsh barking sound. "She should be apologizing to me." Bella was not finished. She took a half step closer, a gesture of respect, not aggression. "We are taught," she said, her voice resonating with the conviction of her studies, "that a host who degrades those in his service has no honor. A man who confuses wealth with nobility and cruelty with strength is a man of small character. I pray you do not judge our city by this small man." "Small man!" Sir Julian Croft let out a small, sharp sound, almost a laugh, and covered it with a cough. Mr. al-Badr's face, previously a stone mask, transformed. A slow, deeply appreciative smile spread across his features. He looked at this young, wine-drenched waitress, as if seeing her for the first time. He replied, his own voice in the same formal, respectful tongue. "Your words are as clear as water in the desert, and your honor is as evident as the star," he said. "You have nothing to apologize for. You have been the victim of an offense, not the perpetrator." He then turned his head, his gaze falling on Griffin Vance with the weight of a glacier. He switched back to his perfect, cutting Oxford English. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice quiet, yet it sliced through the restaurant. "Your translator is fired. He is obsolete." Griffin looked completely lost. "What? What are you talking about?" "I am talking about this young lady," Mr. al-Badr said, gesturing to Bella. "For the last 10 minutes, my colleague Sir Julian and I have been subjected to your insults." "Insults? I've been selling you," Griffin protested. "You have," Sir Julian cut in, his voice dripping with ice. "You have been telling Mr. al-Badr through your woefully inadequate translator that your Desert Star project will control the future of the Gulf. You said your data would be a leash on the region's partners?" Griffin's blood ran cold. I I said it would be a partnership, a link. Your translator, Mr. Al-Badr said, used the word silsila, which can mean link, yes. But in the context you used it, a context of sovereignty and disruption, it also means a chain, a shackle. You have been threatening us, Mr. Vance. Whether through your own arrogance or your translator's incompetence, I do not care. He then looked back at Bella, his eyes softening. This young woman, however, he said, in the space of 30 seconds, has shown more linguistic skill, more cultural understanding, and more profound honor than you and your entire team have displayed in 3 hours. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping loudly on the floor. He stood up. Sir Julian Croft stood up. Mr. Al-Badr's entire security and advisory team, seated at a nearby table, stood up in unison. Griffin Vance was still seated, his mouth open, his face a mask of pale, dawning horror. Mr. Khaled Al-Badr looked at Isabella Rossi. He inclined his head in a gesture of deep respect, and then he did something no one in Astra had ever seen a man of his stature do. He began to applaud. It was not a loud, boisterous clap. It was a slow, deliberate, and deeply respectful sound. Clap, clap, clap. Sir Julian Croft immediately joined him, his applause mirroring Mr. Al-Badr's. The rest of their delegation followed. 10 men, all standing, all clapping, their eyes fixed not on the billionaire, but on the waitress. The room held its breath. Griffin Vance looked around, bewildered. "What is this? Sit down. We haven't finished dinner." "Oh, I believe we have, Mr. Vance," Sir Julian said, his voice cutting. He turned to Mr. Al-Badr and spoke in their shared language. Mr. Al-Badr nodded, then pulled a sleek black business card from his jacket pocket. He walked around the table, past the stunned Griffin Vance, and stopped directly in front of Bella. He offered her the card. "Young lady," he said in English for the whole room to hear, "I do not know your story, but your command of my language, and more importantly, your understanding of honor is remarkable. The Al-Qadima Group retains a team of diplomatic and linguistic advisors. They are the best in the world, and I believe you would be an asset to them." Bella, her hands shaking, wine still dripping from her sleeve, took the card. It was heavy, made of black metal. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. "No," Mr. Al-Badr said, his smile kind. "Thank you." He and Sir Julian then turned to leave. "Wait." Griffin scrambled to his feet, his chair almost toppling over. "You can't leave. The Desert Star project. This is a multi-billion-dollar deal. You're going to walk away because of her?" Mr. Al-Badr paused at the edge of the banquet. He looked back at Griffin, his face devoid of all warmth. "We are walking away because of you," he said, his voice flat. "We are walking away because you are a man of no honor. You are rude to your guests, you are cruel to your staff, and your technology is built on a foundation of arrogance. The Al-Qadima Group does not build on sand. Good evening." He and his delegation turned and walked toward the exit. Griffin Vance stood, defeated, his face turning from pale white to a deep, blotchy red. He had lost. In front of everyone, he had lost. And then the second sound started. At a table near the window, a woman stood up. She was elegant, in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a commanding presence. Her name was Catherine Davenport, the CEO of Morgan Stanley's chief rival investment bank. She had been watching the entire exchange with a keen, analytical interest. She too began to clap. Her applause was not for Mr. Al-Badr, but for Bella. Then from across the room, an elderly philanthropist, a pillar of New York society, stood and joined the applause. The stockbroker, Brad, who had started the whole mess, stood up, his face red with shame, and clapped, his eyes on Bella. I'm so sorry," he mouthed. Within 10 seconds, the entire restaurant was on its feet, table after table. The hedge fund managers, the tech rivals, the old money families, the politicians. They all stood, and the sound of their applause filled the 64th floor. It was a deafening, rolling thunder. It was not just for Bella. It was at Griffin Vance. It was the collective, sudden, and brutal judgment of his peers. They were applauding the fall of a tyrant. They were applauding the courage of the girl who had exposed him. Griffin Vance looked around, his empire of ego crumbling in real time. This was worse than losing the deal. This was social execution. This was a story that would be on every terminal, in every boardroom, by morning. Vance bombs at Astra. Griffin's $20,000 insult. Mr. Davies, the manager, seeing the entire room, his entire clientele, standing against Griffin, made a split-second reptilian calculation. He abandoned his former god. He marched over to Griffin Vance. "Mr. Vance," Davies said, his voice shaking with a new, righteous fury, "I must ask you to leave. Your behavior is not welcome at Astra." You're kicking me out?" Griffin sputtered, incredulous. "Security," Mr. Davies called, and two large men in black suits materialized. "Please escort Mr. Vance from the premises. He will not be paying his check." The applause grew louder as the two security guards flanked Griffin, who for the first time in his life looked utterly and completely defeated. He allowed himself to be led away, his face a mask of incandescent rage, the entire room clapping at his back. The applause only subsided when he was gone. The room sat down, but the energy was electric. Everyone was talking, whispering, looking at the center of it all. Bella stood there, drenched, shaking, holding a black metal business card, the focus of the most powerful room in Newquay. The moment the elevator doors closed on Griffin Vance, Mr. Davies' attention snapped back to Bella. His face, which had been a mask of righteous indignation, was now a complex map of panic and fawning regret. "Miss Rossi, Isabella, my dear girl," he stammered, rushing to her side with a stack of pristine linen napkins. "Are you all right? That was, my goodness. Let's get you to the staff room. Let's get you cleaned up." Bella just looked at him, her eyes clear. She didn't take the napkins. The applause had stopped, but its echo still resonated in her bones. She was no longer a ghost. She was, for better or worse, the most visible person in the room. "Mr. Davies," she said, her voice quiet but strong. "Yes, my dear, anything," he said, dabbing uselessly at her wine-soaked shoulder. "I quit." The words hung in the air, simple and final. Davies froze. "You... what?" No, you don't mean that. You're upset. That man was a monster, a brute. We're all on your side. I defended you." Bella almost laughed. "You fired me, Mr. Davies. You were screaming for security." "A misunderstanding," he insisted, his eyes wide and desperate. A tactic. To defuse the situation. You're an exemplary employee, Isabella. Exemplary." "I quit," Bella repeated more firmly. She began to untie the knot of her soiled apron. "Miss Rossi," a new voice cut through the manager's pathetic babbling. Bella turned. It was the woman who had started the second wave of applause, Catherine Davenport. The CEO had walked over from her table, her expression one of cool, sharp appraisal. "That was quite a performance," Catherine said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm. "Catherine Davenport." "Isabella Rossi," Bella replied, her own hand sticky with wine. "I know, I heard," Catherine said with a small smile. "I lead the Global Strategy Division at J.P. Morgan. We have a significant interest in the Gulf. My lead translator is good. You're better. Your accent is flawless, and your timing is lethal." Bella felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks, a different kind of heat than the humiliation. "I'm a postgrad student at Columbia. My thesis is on diplomatic discourse." "I don't care about your thesis," Catherine said, not unkindly. "I care about what I just saw. You stood your ground, you absorbed a public humiliation, and you turned your enemy's weapon back on him in a language he couldn't even understand. That's not a waitress. That's a negotiator." She reached into her purse and pulled out her own card. It was simple, heavy cream cardstock with embossed black lettering. "Mr. Albatter's offer is a fine one," Catherine said, her eyes glittering. "He's in diplomacy. I'm in finance. It's faster. My office. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. Don't wear the suit you were planning to wear. My assistant will take you to Bergdorf's at 8. We'll buy you a new one." Bella was stunned. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Catherine said. "My starting offer for a senior analyst with your specific skills is $300,000 plus signing bonus. We can discuss the details tomorrow." $300,000. Bella thought of her mother's medical bills. She thought of her student debt. She thought of the 2 a.m. subway ride she was about to miss. She looked at the card. She looked at Mr. Davies, who now just looked small and pathetic. She looked at the room where people were now resuming their dinners, but still glancing her way, whispering, lifting their glasses in silent toasts. She closed her hand around Catherine Davenport's card, tucking it next to Mr. Albotter's. "Yes," Bella said, her voice clear. "Yes, I'll see you at 9. 8, Catherine corrected her, smiling. "For the suit. Don't be late." The CEO nodded once, turned, and went back to her table as if she had just finished ordering dessert. Bella dropped her wine-soaked apron onto the floor at Mr. Davies's feet. "Good night, Mr. Davies." She turned and walked out of Astra. She did not use the staff exit. She walked straight through the opulent, champagne gold dining room, her head held high, her blouse stained crimson, her hair matted. She walked past the gawking hosts at the entrance, through the massive gold leaf doors and into the elevator. As the doors slid shut, she finally allowed herself to lean against the wall. She looked at the 2 cards in her hand. Her reflection in the mirrored wall of the elevator was a mess. She was covered in wine, her eyes were red, and she was smiling. The next morning, Griffin Vance's name was toxic. The Astra Applause incident, as it was immediately dubbed, was the lead story on every financial blog. His company's stock, Vance Tech, dropped 9% at the opening bell. His board called an emergency meeting. The Desert Star project was officially declared dead. At 8 a.m., a sleek black town car picked Isabella up from her tiny apartment. At 8:15 a.m., she was trying on an Armani suit that cost more than her car. At 9 a.m., she walked into the towering glass and steel headquarters of J.P. Morgan. She was no longer wearing a starched apron. She was wearing a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, her hair was clean, and she was carrying a new leather briefcase. She stepped into the elevator, the one that led to the executive suites. As the doors closed, she thought about the tray she used to carry. The weight of the champagne, the cocktails, the demands of men who saw her as invisible. Today, the briefcase in her hand felt light as a feather. She was on her way up, and this time, she was taking the express. The 68th floor of the J.P. Morgan Tower was a world away from the 64th floor of Astra, but the air was just as thin. Here, the silence wasn't punctuated by the clinking of silverware, but by the whisper of expensive shoes on marble floors and the low, constant hum of the global market. The view of Manhattan was even more spectacular, but no one seemed to notice. They were all looking at screens, their faces illuminated by the green and red glow of shifting fortunes. For the first week, Isabella felt like a ghost again, but of a different kind. At Astra, she had been invisible by design, a functional part of the background. Here, she was an anomaly, a curiosity. The story of the Astra Applause had become a piece of Wall Street lore overnight. People knew who she was. They would glance at her as she walked to their ridiculously lavish coffee station, their eyes a mixture of admiration, suspicion, and simple disbelief. She was the waitress, the urban legend who had declawed Griffin Vance. It was a powerful entry, but it also felt like a brand she couldn't scrub off. She had a spacious office with a window, a privilege she quickly learned was reserved for senior staff. On her desk sat a state-of-the-art terminal, a stack of financial primers Catherine had sent over, and a framed photo of her mother, taken last spring before the worst of the illness had set in. She had called her mother from the town car on the way to Bergdorf's. The sheer joy and relief in her mother's voice when Bella told her she could now afford the specialist at Mount Sinai was a fuel that burned brighter than any ambition. Her official title was Senior Analyst, Global Strategy and Cultural Affairs, a role Catherine had seemingly invented for her. Her first few days were a blur of onboarding, security clearances, and a crash course in financial jargon that made Aramaic syntax seem like a children's nursery rhyme. A colleague named Mark Peterson, a sharp Ivy League analyst in his late 20s with a perpetually skeptical smirk, had been assigned to bring her up to speed. "So it's all about leveraging derivatives to hedge against sovereign debt exposure," Mark explained, pointing at a dizzying chart. "The key is to mitigate the alpha decay in the emerging markets portfolio." Simple. It was not simple. Isabella felt a familiar wave of imposter syndrome. She could deconstruct the political undertones of a 12th century Arabic poem, but alpha decay sounded like a problem for a nuclear physicist. Mark seemed to relish her confusion. "It's okay," he'd said with a condescending pat on her shoulder. "It's a different world from, you know, service." On Friday morning, Catherine Davenport's assistant summoned her. "Ms. Davenport will see you now." Catherine's corner office was less an office and more a command center, with panoramic views of the Statue of Liberty and the endless sea beyond. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Close the door, Isabella. How's the fire hose?" "It's a lot to absorb," Bella admitted. "Mark Peterson is very thorough." Catherine waved a dismissive hand. "Mark Peterson knows how to read a spreadsheet. He thinks culture is something you find in yogurt. I didn't hire you to be Mark Peterson. I hired you to see what he can't." She gestured to a large mahogany table on which a thick binder was placed. The Al Fahim Royal Fund, based out of Abu Dhabi, a $90 billion portfolio. They are looking to make a significant move into Western green energy infrastructure. We want to be their exclusive partner. For the last 6 months, our team has been hitting a wall, a very polite, very quiet, very firm wall. She opened the binder. It was filled with emails, translated transcripts of video calls, and meeting summaries. "The head of the fund is Sheikh Sultan Al Fahim," Catherine continued, tapping a photo of a man with kind, intelligent eyes and a graying beard. "He's old school, educated at Cambridge, but deeply traditional. Our team, led by Mark, has pitched him on wind farms in Texas, solar arrays in California, everything. The numbers are solid, the projections are phenomenal. But we get nowhere. They thank us for our comprehensive data and then go silent for weeks." She pushed the binder toward Isabella. "This is your first project. I don't want a financial analysis. I don't want you to look at the numbers. I want you to read the people. Find the friction. Find what Mark and his team of spreadsheet jockeys are missing. You have until Monday." Bella spent the entire weekend in her office, the city lights twinkling below her. She didn't look at the financial models. She read the words. She immersed herself in the cadence of the conversations, the choice of phrases, the things said, and more importantly, the things left unsaid. Mark's team had provided literal, sterile translations. They were grammatically correct but culturally tone-deaf. She noticed it on Saturday afternoon, buried in the transcript of a call from 3 months prior. Mark had been passionately explaining the projected quarterly returns of a solar project. According to the transcript, Sheikh Sultan had replied with a simple phrase which was translated as, "The future is in the hands of God, but we must plant the seeds." Mark's team had interpreted this as a vague, non-committal platitude, a polite dismissal. Bella knew better. She recognized the phrase not as a dismissal, but as a proverb. It wasn't about God's will in a fatalistic sense. It was a very specific and culturally significant statement about legacy. The sheikh wasn't interested in quarterly returns. He was interested in what the project would look like in 100 years. He wasn't building a portfolio. He was building a legacy for his great-grandchildren. He was planting a tree, not a cash crop. Mark was talking about the harvest. The sheikh was asking about the roots. She found more. In an email, the sheikh's office had referred to the proposed projects as ventures. The J.P. Morgan team, in their replies, called them investments. To a Western ear, the difference was negligible. To Bella, it was a chasm. A venture implies a shared journey, a partnership with shared risks and purpose. An investment implies a simple transaction, a cold exchange of capital for return. On Monday morning, Bella walked into Catherine's office and placed a single, 2-page memo on her desk. Mark Peterson was there, looking smug. "Well?" Catherine asked. "They think we're disrespectful," Bella said simply. Mark scoffed. "That's ridiculous. Our proposals have been nothing but professional." "We're not speaking their language," Bella continued, her voice steady. "And I don't mean Arabic. We're talking about quarterly growth and profit margins. They're talking about legacy and dynastic stability. We're pitching an investment. They want a partnership. Sheikh Sultan isn't trying to make money. He's trying to build a future for his nation after the oil runs out. He feels we see him as a walking wallet, not as a nation builder." She pointed to the proverb in the transcript. "This line here, it's not a dismissal. It's an invitation. He was inviting us to talk about the 100-year plan and we responded with a spreadsheet about next quarter's earnings. To him, it must have seemed profoundly insulting, like a man talking about his children's future and being asked how much they're worth. Silence. Mark opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked down at the transcript, then back at Bella, a flicker of genuine shock in his eyes. Catherine Davenport read Bella's 2-page memo. She read it twice. A slow smile spread across her face. It was the same analytical, appreciative smile Bella had seen at the restaurant. "You've been here 1 week, Miss Rossi," Catherine said, leaning back in her chair, "and you've just done more to advance this deal than Mark's entire team has in 6 months. She looked at Mark. "Cancel your next meeting. You're going to sit with Miss Rossi, and you are going to redraft every single word of our proposal from scratch. From now on, she is the lead on all communications with the Al-Fahim Fund. Is that clear?" Mark Peterson, for the first time since she'd met him, looked not at a waitress, but at a strategist. He nodded, humbled. "Yes, Miss Davenport, perfectly clear." As Bella left the office, she felt a profound sense of rightness. The language of power wasn't just in numbers and stock tickers. It was in the words, the culture, the respect. It was a language she had spent her life learning. And here, in the heart of global finance, she was finally fluent. The story of Isabella Rossi reminds us that the most powerful weapon isn't wealth or position, it's intelligence, dignity, and the courage to speak your truth, even when your voice is shaking. Griffin Vance had billions, but Isabella had something more valuable: self-worth. She proved that one person, armed with knowledge and honor, can topple an empire of arrogance. What did you think of Isabella's response? Have you ever witnessed a moment where the underdog completely turned the tables on someone in power? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of justice and vindication, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribing to the channel for more dramatic real-life stories. Your support allows us to keep telling these powerful tales. Thank you for listening.